Hello, welcome back. It's been literally ages since I've done these videos, so I thought it was time to bring this back and just finish this up. Yeah, a lot has happened in the last 3.5 years, so I'm sorry that it's taken me that long to get back to these videos. But you know, like I did a YouTube series called Doom Mixtape where I talked about some of my favorite custom Doom WOD levels and stuff. And I just kind of always had in the back of my mind that I never really finished this, so I guess I'm coming back to it now. But anyway, this is level 6 of Doom 1, episode 2, designed by Sandy Petersen, called Halls of the Damned. And it's kind of an interesting map. It used to hold like a very strange place for me because I think it really freaked me out. And from reading like the Doom World forums, I think it freaked out a lot of other people too. So this beginning is interesting. You kind of exit out of this winding hallway, and you're in this toxic area, and here this corridor that I just went through. There's no suit. Like normally in this game, they give you a suit to go through the toxic corridor because you have to go through that area. But instead, it just gives you a bunch of med kits, which is a very strange way of getting around that. Me picking up a berserk pack caused this whole area to get unlocked, which is really basically the entirety of the level, but it's behind sort of near the entrance area. So the main area that you would think is sort of the main avenue of progression when you go outside is actually just kind of a misdirection. And there are a lot of misdirections in this map in general, but I think the fact that you have to pick up that berserk pack to get to this hall area kind of demonstrates, and the fact that it gives you a chainsaw right here, although that's sort of a secret. It's not marked as a secret, but it is basically a secret. Kind of underscores the fact that you'll be doing a lot of fist fighting. There's a lot of fighting demons, specifically pinkies, in this map. And I'll actually die quite a bit more than I expected to. I guess doing this from pistol start, and I didn't really warm up before playing this. So is the reason why I died a bunch, but still, I was quite surprised how difficult this map is. And I thought I might even been playing it on Nightmare or something, but that isn't the case. It's just there are tons and tons of pinkies on this map. But so the really main area of this map, it's a little bit non-linear. Like that first hallway area I could have skipped, where you pick up the blue key, but it seems reasonably important to do that first. I just skipped by a huge, definitely the scariest area of this map, a very huge, at least by the standards of Doom 1, maze where you fight a bunch of pinkies and there are barons. There's about 1 billion different traps, and the main feature is that it's really dark. It's hard to see, and like that's the part of this map that used to terrify me. And like reading the Doom World comments about this map, it is kind of infamous for that section, and there isn't quite anything like it in Doom 1. It's definitely very atmospheric and really kind of almost verges into kind of like a horror game in some ways. Like there are definitely scary elements of some previous levels, but this is one of the maps that I would say most kind of encapsulates that sort of horror feeling. And this area, I would say, does it too, just because it's confusing. There's this kind of like unnecessary dead-end detour of hallways here that I always found incredibly confusing when I was a kid. And it is confusing, there are 4 different I don't know why I didn't save my whatever. Anyway, there are 4 different passageways, but you enter from kind of the side in this narrow passageway that doesn't really look like an entrance. It looks like kind of a side area, so it's easy to get disoriented and forget once you've entered into this area that that's where you came from. And most of these areas are like traps. Like, only one of them is required to go to get a key. The rest are just kind of dead ends. I do think they give you more secrets, but they all kind of trap you in their own ways. Like here, there's a crushing ceiling here, which I guess is indicated by that crushed like corpse there. That's how you're supposed to tell. But yeah, this is kind of a trap, and I don't do a very good job of handling this. The best thing to do in a map like this is just to enter the room and then back out, which is what I'm going to do after that. And to this map's credit, like, those light amp visors, I don't like picking them up just to pick them up, but you really, really do need it in the dark area. It makes it a lot easier just because there's so many traps. There are so many pinkies hidden in that maze. So I'm trying to make sure that I get all the secrets, but I think I do. But yeah, so this map, I said before, is designed by Sandy Petersen, and the previous map that he did, which I did a video for almost 3.5 years ago, is interesting because it kind of breaks from the progression of the first several maps of the episode. And it doesn't have any, like, it doesn't feature any keys. Like, it's just a completely open, non-linear map. And it kind of has like a little bit of an aimless quality. Like, it starts out very strong and then just kind of meanders. And it's an interesting map to explore, but it's quite big. And there's a lot of areas that you don't need to go to beat the level. It's sort of this way in this one. It's a little, but it's more sort of narrow. It really does have the feeling of being lost in this labyrinth. And I think in terms of like the progression and the mood, the episode kind of goes off the rails with these 2 levels. But like looking back, it's kind of an element of Doom 1 and Doom 1 episode 2 and episode 3, where there are all these like weird just dead ends and things that don't make sense, and the progression isn't entirely coherent. It doesn't feel like it builds up like in episode 1. But I think to me that is kind of, even though it's definitely flawed, I would consider that part of the appeal of this game and a lot of older games from the era of Doom, that you really just don't know what to expect every time you go into a level. And you know, this is definitely an example of it. Like, this is not something. This map is very. It kind of breaks with a lot of things going on in this episode. I mean, thematically, it's still similar, but it doesn't quite fit in anywhere else. And then the next map just kind of goes back to what particularly episode 2, map 2 and map 4 went to. It kind of goes back into that theme, away from this sort of like horror atmospheric setting. So I don't know, it's interesting. It's been said before that Sandy Petersen, his background, well, first of all, he's a Mormon, and he does, and you know, when people asked him, how can you be, you know, a Mormon, like a religious person, and design a game like Doom? And he's like, well, it's not difficult for me because they're the bad guys. And it's kind of interesting to me to think about how that kind of comes into his approach, like the way that he sees evil. He really kind of believes in some of this imagery and some of the stuff as being really bad, and being very real. And I think some of the tricks and stuff that he does, in addition to him being kind of coming from sort of the format of like D&D, Dungeon Master, dungeon design, which I think he came from role-playing from like role-playing games, if I'm not mistaken, before he was hired at id. But it also means he has like something invested in kind of making evil feel truly evil. And his maps, more than anything, are just very unpredictable. Like, and there are things that just feel wrong or off, like kind of strange, illogical, in a way that I think can be frowned upon in sort of the more kind of traditional thought about what is appropriate to do in level design and what isn't. And his maps, aren't as popular necessarily as John Romero or the maps that Tom Hall worked on. But on the other hand, I think his maps are really crucial to what make Doom feel the way that it does and the atmosphere of it. And I think I have seen people in the Doom community in particular sort of come back to Sandy Petersen and have an appreciation for what he was doing. Because, like, at the end of the day, like, a lot of the, community Doom mods that are still being made might have more detail and stuff, but they don't necessarily have the kind of interesting encounters that any of the levels of Doom 1 have, even the more unpolished Sandy Petersen levels. So even though, like, for example, this map is very flat, there's very little height variation, and it's a lot of corridors and halls. It feels like maybe kind of Wolfenstein-ish in places. In spite of that, like, there are just a lot of ideas going on, and you can tell he was sort of making this area in particular, which is made a lot easier by the fact that I have the light amp thing. And this map is very generous with giving you the light amp, which is cool. But it does make it does feel like it has a very strong atmosphere. Like, in this area, you keep walking into new sort of corners of this hallway, of this big dark room that seem to go forever, and more monsters just continually pop out of these monster closets, and you never quite know where they're coming from, or like when they're gonna stop coming, and that's very nerve-wracking, especially like if you're playing this map for the first time. You don't know how long this area is. You don't know how long necessarily the light amp is gonna last, or if you just wander in here without, this area is first. So if you don't wander to the side and pick up that light amp visor, or go further down and pick it up past this area, in some of the other rooms in that kind of forsaken hallway area, then you're not going to know how to get through here or how big it is. And that can be really scary, especially when you're dealing with Barons, because Barons in Doom 1, like, you don't always have the ammunition to really to deal with that. And I'm dealing with, like, basically a pistol start. Well, I am dealing with a pistol start, which makes it kind of required for me to use the chainsaw and the berserk as much as possible. I mean, and of course, like, Doom has always let you save anywhere you want, and that makes it easier to get through difficult levels. And I don't know, that's one thing that I've always loved about Doom. But yeah, okay, here you see what this area looks like normally. It's quite dark. I mean, like, even with the lights, like, it is really disorienting, and the way that the room is lit is very disorienting. It is kind of like, I appreciate it aesthetically, without the light amp visor. And that's like, I don't really like the light amp visor because I think it ruins the lighting in the Doom engine, which has always been a big part of, like, the appeal of Doom for me. But I do feel like it's necessary in this case. So yeah, I'm continuing to run through the maze right now. Let's see. So recently, actually, between the time that I started this series, doomworld.com, which is one of the major Doom community hubs. Another one is Z-Doom. By the way, I'm playing this in Chocolate Doom, which is a source port that is intended to emulate the experience of playing the original Doom. And I had some difficulty getting it getting recognized by streaming programs, so I apologize. Like, the video quality might be a little lower, or like the resolution is a little weird, so I apologize for that, but it seemed to work okay. But yeah, I think like one thing that has happened on Doom World is they had a sort of a bracket tournament where everyone voted for their favorite levels in Doom 1 and Doom 2, and it was sort of bracketed like the NCAA tournament, like NCAA basketball, or something like that. And this map was definitely one of the lower seeds. And actually, there's a thread on doomworld.com called "I Hate Halls of the Damned." But yeah, no, it's interesting specifically because Linguisa, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who's one of the administrators of Doom World, wrote up descriptions of each of the maps. So I want to read the description for this map and the next map when it starts, just because I think it's interesting to get that perspective. So this is what he said about E2M6 Halls of the Damned. Sandy Petersen may not have yet discovered the more complex methods of non-linearity that would define his Doom 2 work, but this deliberately paced level from the shores of hell was a big step in that direction. I say this as I'm like chainsawing everyone to death. But I shall continue. Okay. The maze-like geometry allows for the working of several dangerous traps which trigger as the player blunders his or her way up and down the dimly lit halls. The number of light amplification goggles on offer seem to rob this level of some of its appeal in this regard, however. I mean, honestly, they had to balance it out like for players of the time, because this was a pretty difficult map, especially given the amount of demons that are in there. But that's a valid critique. Anyway, with any luck, the hapless player will fall into the biggest trap of all and drop into one of Doom's most infamous moments, the fake exit, where flipping the exit switch results in the door dropping out and the player suddenly beset on all sides by baddies. Crushers, demons, and barons abound in the Halls of the Damned. Halls of the Damned also has the distinction of being one of my favorite Doom map names, because it is incredibly descriptive of what the map actually is. Like, a lot of the maps, especially in episode 1, have map names like Command Control and things like that that don't really mean anything. They're just kind of abstract, vaguely sci-fi sounding names. Here you see, by the way, I finally picked up the red key. Or was that the yellow key? Oh, whatever. So I have all the keys now and I can exit the map, but I want to go to the fake exit area first. Because that is one of the most memorable moments of this map, and it's something that I always like. When I would play through this game as a kid, I would play it with cheat codes on, because I just liked exploring the maps, but the game itself was too hard and scary for me. I was not very old. I shouldn't have been playing this game probably, but I would always remember particular moments, but couldn't remember what sort of maps they were associated with. And this is one of the biggest moments. Like the exit. This looks like an exit, right? But it's actually like a huge trap. And this is like, I think this is the first time, and maybe the only time, that actually happens in Doom 1. It's really devious, especially considering, that nothing like this was done before. You would never expect that. When an exit you would expect that an exit is an exit. I actually, a while back, I wrote a series of articles about Wolfenstein 3D, which is the game made by id Software before this, about Episode 4 in Wolfenstein, specifically Episode 4, Map 5, which also has a bunch of fake exits in it, and how it kind of breaks from the normal language and vocabulary of the game in a way that might be deemed unfair or kind of like, why would you do that? And here, I mean, it gives you a reward of giving you the soul sphere and stuff like that. But in that particular map, I guess I argued that it was effective in sort of getting across a feeling that, you know, you're creeping in these like Nazi caverns, and things aren't right, and the normal sort of rational kind of game way that the game is set up maybe doesn't necessarily like apply to an environment of that sort of mood or feeling. Like, things shouldn't be fair because all the time, because you're going through an environment that is hellish, and they're trying to, you know, make it feel that way, and kind of get across that feeling or emotion to the player. Here, there's also a bunch of ambushes here that's like are also totally unexpected, but pretty cool, except for the fact that the demons got stuck there. I don't know what happened. But yeah, I pretty much made it through all of this map. And then at the end, you just have to backpedal out. Like, I had to backpedal out of that long hallway area. You would think that it would lead to something, but it doesn't. It just pushes you back out to where you entered. And there's no flow or anything. You just have to go back through that space again. I think that's really interesting and kind of fits with the theme of the map. It might not be, the best map by conventional design standards, but I think it very effectively gets across, the sort of feeling that it wants to get across. So I definitely think it should be praised for that. So here's a really interesting map. This map was like, first of all, there's an ambush right at the beginning of this map, which I always found really interesting. But this map is a very strange beast. It's called Spawning Vats. It was originally started by Tom Hall. Sort of like some of the other Episode 2 maps, particularly Episode 2, Map 2, which I always saw this as being kind of a continuation of because it has a big cargo area. But this map actually has a really interesting history, which I will read from that Doom World thread. This is Linguica. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. E2M7 Spawning Vats. E2M7 is a real oddball of a map. Started by Tom Hall and finished by Sandy Petersen, it is possibly the first real Doom level ever made. Sorry. I find it funny, like, reading this while I'm chainsawing. There's so many, like, pinkies in this part. And it's just easy to stand in this, like, narrow corridor and chainsaw them all to death. Assuming that you have the chainsaw at this point. But anyway, started by Tom Hall and finished by Sandy Petersen, is possibly the first real Doom level ever made and can be found in the V.4 Doom Alpha. So there's a Doom Alpha that is now, like, publicly. You can find it online. And it has a lot of the sort of early versions and ideas that they were trying out with Doom, and one of them was Doom. All this was like Tom Hall's ideas. He created this thing called the Doom Bible, and there was going to be this whole involved story where you're this military, you're this space marine, and then a lot of things happen, sort of like in Half-Life 1 or something like that. There's going to be more kind of storytelling elements, or Marathon. The series by Bungie is kind of another example of that. But then, that didn't really end up happening, and he ended up leaving before Doom was completed. So a lot of these maps were completed by Sandy Petersen. But this map was actually in the first Doom Alpha, or one of the very first, labeled as E1M1. So this was the first map. And you can even still find the original starting room, albeit stripped of its in-progress poker game and office chairs. Again, reading from this. Doom World thread. Many people consider spawning vats, a sort of amalgamation of many of the previous Episode 2 levels. There's a crate maze a la E2M2, which is where I just was. By the way, love the hanging skeletons on, air, or the very bizarre wall texture here. There's some very strange texturing choices in this map. But then there are some parts that look really cool. It's kind of a strange mix of a lot of different things. It's very unpredictable. There's a crate maze, a computer complex like in E2M4, etc. But it would be more accurate to say that the influence went the other way, and other maps cribbed influences from E2M7. This map is heavily exploration-based, like most of the Hall/Peterson creations, and provides a sort of calm before the storm of the final boss fight of E2M8. Yeah, so even though this map is kind of big and there's a lot going on in it, it's not as hard as the previous map. But it's a really interesting space, and it was one of my favorite maps when I used to play through this episode. It also has held a special place for me because it just has so many different areas that seem like they're parts of a different map, and it kind of goes from one to the other in a really interesting way. But I think that's the kind of remnant of there being a story. And you could feel that, like, especially once you get to the computer base area that I'm going to go to later, that there was kind of a story or a narrative being told here. We don't have anymore. It's kind of lost. It's kind of like, I mean, until people knew about the Doom Bible, none of those things existed. This was just a straightforward action game, but it has those remnants of a story, and that kind of makes it interesting. I really like this area to the side with the computer textures. The computer textures are some of my favorite textures, and this blue texture too are some of my favorite textures. And it's just this very compact, like, interesting kind of little side area that doesn't really have to do with the rest of the map, but kind of feels like you're poking inside of a computer or something. And each sort of little section, this map has its own identity, in spite of the fact that, like, this cargo area is very bizarre. The texture that is used is very bizarre, and the lights are very bizarre. There's a lot of things that just feel off about this map. And I think that is a result of it being two different authors. The door is kind of like weirdly high off the ground. I never quite understood that. I mean, and this feels like a side room from, specifically one of the side rooms from E2M4. But I like the kind of callbacks to previous maps, like because it kind of makes them feel as if they're one piece, like they're part of a singular kind of episode. One map that this reminds me of too is a map that I haven't talked about yet in episode 3, E3M3, which is also by Tom Hall and completed by Sandy Petersen. But yeah, so this is theoretically non-linear, right? Like I could have gone to the right here, but I wouldn't have been able to go to a lot of the areas before picking up the blue key. So it really was kind of required. By the way, I really like the light in this room. It's kind of weird, like if you look at the alpha version that was talked about, and you like look at that room is just a square room. It doesn't really seem to have a significance, but because of the texturing in that light, it kind of made it significant. But I think, like, it is kind of a random place to start the map. Like, this map it feels like you kind of could start in several different places. And I think the fact that it was probably finished relatively quickly, they didn't really quite know how to make the progression, work where you have a starting area that really feels like a starting area, like something like, the previous two maps. So it kind of feels like you just go right into the action, and at kind of almost an arbitrary starting point. I'm not even really sure, by the way, what the purpose of this invulnerability sphere is. I think it's supposed to be for when you go into the toxic area that is right after this. Or maybe it's to fight the Baron, but there are several Barons in the previous map. So I never really quite got why that was there. But yeah, this is an interesting little... another very strangely... Because it's outside, but it's completely dark. And the sky is bright. It's just another like weird feature of Doom that like the fact that the texture theme keeps changing. There's this upside down cross and this combination of sort of hell infiltrating into the tech area here, and there's also those pillars that I passed by. So there's a very strange combination of or this like toxic waste area to the right. There's this very strange combination of hell taking over these more kind of industrial seeming spaces. And I don't know, I think that's the thing that I always found interesting about episode 2 in particular, is it's just so unpredictable. There are these little toxic pits. They don't really serve any gameplay purpose. They're there presumably to tell some sort of narrative or create an atmosphere. And that's something, again, that like in the sort of conventional game design parlance, we would say that's totally unnecessary. There's no purpose for doing that. Because it like the story isn't really made explicit in this game. And it serves no purpose when you're talking about the gameplay other than that hurts you. But it kind of gets across an effect in a different way. Like it adds to the atmosphere and the environment and kind of creates a feeling of like that there are just things that you don't really know or understand about this game. And I think that mystery is so much of the appeal of Doom, or the fact that like I can get into that area by just wandering through here, but I need the blue key to get into that area if I want to come from above, because I can like run around in that entire area, but I won't be able to pick up the key that I need unless I enter from here, which you'll see shortly. But it's a very strange... Yeah, I guess this is a bug in Doom 1 that the Pinky didn't see me. That like marble thing being there in the midst of this area is also very strange. There's a lot of like very almost like grandiose texturing. The stairway here, like this area to the right is not necessary at all. It feels like it's important. There are a lot of areas in episode 2 in general that feel like they're important or significant, but have no real importance or significance. They're just kind of these side areas that don't really seem to like be much of anything. And it is quite strange. I don't quite, I really don't quite understand it, honestly. But it's interesting. But yeah. Yeah, and those hanging dudes. I think like because there's no familiarity or no with this kind of engine and no rules established for game design, a lot of things they just did because like why not? Let's try it out. And of course it doesn't always work, but it does create this sort of atmosphere of mystery that I think that they were trying. So here's the drop down area, which has always been, this is honestly one of my favorite moments in Doom 1, is you drop down into this area and then all of a sudden this area completely has its own mood. And this is where the very first room of Doom 1 was made. Like this area was kind of the alpha beginning area for Doom 1, for like, you know, for the original alpha. Like it was E1 M1, and I guess it was kind of supposed to be like the military base, but it ended up showing up at some random point in E2 M7, like at the end of an episode, which is what kind of makes it really strange. And those hallways are back from, and yeah, so that's the entrance to the side. But those light hallways, or those little like lights that hurt you, are back, which is always a very strange touch. Okay, so this was the first room in Doom. The very first room that was made that had the table with the Marines playing cards, and that table is that little area that I just picked up health on. It doesn't really seem like much now, but this room, this is where it all started, which is kind of crazy to think about. Again, because it shows up in the most random place, and you would never kind of suspect that had any significance. I don't know. And that's what I always found strange about this whole area, is it feels very much of itself. Like it is very sort of encapsulated, and it's much more kind of like a consistent and coherent mood than anywhere else in the episode. So it feels like there's something that you're kind of infiltrating into here, but it never really gets expanded upon. Here's another room that was, one of the early rooms. It's just a big square. But it has those computer textures with the pictures of like all these planets. And here's that connection to that other key area. But yeah, this map is also, like you can see, is kind of a big square or a big rectangle. It's very compact. A lot is fit in one map. But yeah, I'm gonna be picking up the final key now. I do like that you can look through there. That's really neat. Yeah, I don't know. And this goes back to the thing that I was saying, in that I would remember pieces and parts of different maps but never associate them with each other. And I think it's just because like there's so much that kind of doesn't really fit in any one place. It feels almost kind of arbitrary. And that's very true of episode 3 as well. But it's also it is memorable. Like it's weirdly memorable. There's something kind of unforgettable about Doom and the level design in Doom that it doesn't, and I don't know, maybe it's the combination of the engine and like the lighting and some of the texturing and some of the stuff that just makes it strange, or the fact that it's a pretty colorful game in a lot of ways, especially when you compare it with like Quake or Half-Life or something like that. There's just something that is... so I'm picking up a secret here before exiting the map. There's just something that makes it kind of stand out among the other kinds of games that were released at the time. And it's not just even a matter of like that it happened to be, the first. Because, when like a lot of people will talk about Doom, I mean, it was like the first big game like this that was sort of an effective, an interesting sort of multi-dimensional first-person shooter, and definitely created that formula. But like, if you look back, I think a lot of people will dismiss a lot of the strange things about Doom, or the mazy level design, or some of this stuff. But for me, that was like, in the Doom remake that came out last year, which I haven't played, so I apologize. By the way, I totally owned myself here. And because I'm a wimp, I reloaded my save because I wanted to have that 200 health, even though I didn't really need it. But anyway, I do think, from what I've seen, it does capture a lot of what makes Doom interesting, or at least when we're talking about the combat. But I think what I always found interesting about Doom was a little bit different from that. I actually really liked the strange atmosphere and the kind of non-linear level design, the mazy nature of it, and like that's a result of it being made sort of in the time that it was and in the engine that it was. And AAA games just aren't really made that way anymore. So as far as being a AAA game that is made that to feel like Doom but has more of the kind of typical AAA in 2016 approaches to level design and stuff, I think from what I've seen, it seems to do a good job of that. But like some of these elements that are the kind of strangest and hard to pin down about Doom 1. By the way, I like that the cacodemon comes out of that side area. And this exit area, again, like is in a very random place. And the door that you open... You open a door with like a big door, and there's nothing behind it. Sorry for the VLC shot right there. You open a big door, and there's nothing there except a switch, and then you hit the switch, and it just makes another switch like open up behind it. It's kind of silly and unnecessary, but that's part of the feeling of this game that I really like. But yeah, I mean, when people look back at this, I kind of want to argue for the value of this strangeness in this design, and like I want people to kind of in spite of its like flaws and shortcomings and everything. By the way, I like that when you get into the barren area, when you get out of the first area with those like hung barrens that like look like all molded out and stuff, like those aren't actually like hanging textures. They're just like, that's just like a wall texture, which is very strange. But then once you exit that area, you can't get back in there. And it kind of makes it feel like it's almost like a dream or something. Like it's almost too surreal that you saw that. And that's one of the brilliant things about Doom, is it also kind of there's an element of the psychological in the way that these maps are designed, especially when you like look at the Sandy Petersen map design. That's one thing that he was good at doing, at least at his best. It's always tricking you. It's always messing with you in a way that is kind of a mindfuck, and it's something that we might associate today with like a survival horror game, or like Silent Hill or something like that. But I guess that's the element that I want to sort of argue for, because I do think it's really intelligent and interesting in spite of the shortcomings of the design. Like obviously, like if you come back to playing these levels, if you played a lot of other first-person shooters or Doom WADs, there are some ways in which this is going to seem kind of like, elementary or vanilla or whatever. But I think that's why it's important to look at it from the perspective of the time that it came out in, and also just like from a broader, like, what sort of feeling is it trying to get across? Because like obviously it's not going to be as detailed as what came after, but is it effectively kind of getting across a certain feeling? And I think oftentimes, especially in Doom 1, I think Doom 2 was less successful. It does that really effectively, and because there were sort of no rules for how to design a game like this, they kind of made the game based off of what felt like it worked, based off of like the textures and the way that the engine was, and stuff like that. And what would work for this game wouldn't necessarily work for another game. But unfortunately, the way that the industry works now is there's a certain kind of design style that is so like industrialized now, because games are so expensive to make, that it gets replicated across kind of all games, and things become sort of universalized. And while that might make for a more kind of agreeable or pleasant experience, it makes for, in the end, a less interesting one. Because even as like, if you treat it as content, then yes, you get the content more effectively and easily, but you lose a lot of the idiosyncrasies that created something like this. So yeah, that's the Cyber Demon, the infamous Cyber Demon. That's his first appearance, and I just toasted him with all those rockets. I do like the columns in that area, but yeah, the hideous Cyber Demon rolled. The Lord that ruled the Lost Deimos moon base has been slain, and you are triumphant. But where are you? You clamber to the edge of the moon and look down to see the awful truth. Deimos floats above hell itself. You've never heard of anyone escaping from hell, but you make the bastards sorry that they ever heard of you. Quickly you rappel down. Again, sorry for the Explorer screenshot. And yeah, so that floats above hell, and the next episode takes place in hell. This is an illustration, I think, by the same illustrator who did the Doom cover art, who died recently, as far as I know, or at least a few years ago. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for episode 3 some point, hopefully soon.